Hello, welcome to this Bytes webinar on all things Azure VMware solution. My name's Andy Jenkins and I work for VMware as the AVS technical lead for EMEA. I'll be your guide today as we talk through the journey of modernizing your applications and looking at ways AVS can help to address your needs. But first of all, I just want to place AVS in the context of VMware's multi-cloud strategy. So as you're probably familiar with now, VMware's strategy is to be able to run any application, anywhere, on any cloud. And AVS, Azure VMware Solution, forms a key part of that strategy. So my first qualifying question when I talk to customers is, what's your cloud strategy? Because if the answer is Microsoft, AVS is a great fit. If it's more AWS or Google, Oracle, IBM, or any of our 4,000 plus VCPP partners, we have solutions that can help them. And if we get that first qualification right, we can drive consistent infrastructure, consistent operations with a consistent developer model. So if we assume that your cloud strategy is predominantly Microsoft, we think AVS is a good fit. And so the first question that we have to answer is, well, why is that a good fit? Why does AVS make sense? And what I do here is I look at an enterprise in the context of applications. And I'm pretty sure if you are a lead architect, a cloud architect, a line of business lead, or a technical lead, you will be looking at your application landscape. And you will be making decisions on that application landscape based around loosely Gartner 5R model. I know that's sort of morphed into lots of different things, but essentially you'll be looking to refactor, retire, rehost, re-architect, and replace. And as part of that work, you're going to make decisions that say, hey, some of my estate is going to go SaaS, software as a service. And you've probably already made a decision that some of your workload will go to native cloud, in this case, Azure. And you probably have some workloads that are difficult to move, that are unlikely to move, that you're probably going to retire and doesn't justify the business investment to do anything with. And so what that leaves you with is it leaves you with a rectangle of applications that you need to decide what to do with. And this is where I think AVS can help play a key factor in accelerating your cloud journey. Because for these remainder of applications, you've got to decide, are you going to refactor, are you going to re-architect, and are you going to rehost? And as part of that transformation, are you going to transform? Are you going to lift and shift? Are you going to move to PaaS? What is it you're going to do? And while transforming and rehosting works for many applications, there may be reasons why you're struggling to move all your applications to the cloud. And there's lots of different reasons why that might be the case. It's typically not a technical issue, if I'm being honest. The technology to move you to the cloud is pretty mature, but it's often the softer risks associated with cloud migration as to why they slow down. So it could be software licensing. It could just be the complexity of the app. It could be that you're trying to move stuff and build a business case around an environment that's highly virtualized and highly consolidated. So by only taking a subset of those applications and moving them to native, you're not realizing the TCO because you're still operating that infrastructure. It could be a time constraint where you don't have the existing staff available to help you, to give you situational awareness of the application to help you move it. And of course, there's the cloud operating model, people, process, technology. You have to get those things right. And I also often see politics playing a part in cloud migration. So is it cheaper to run on premise? Is it cheaper to run in the cloud? And actually, AVS can help with all this because one of the key values of AVS is you don't refactor, re-architect. You move quickly. So we can accelerate your journey without refactor, re-architect, without re-IPing, if that is the preferred method for exit or expansion, and we can do that at speed. And once you've done that, we can now shift the argument to, is it cheaper? How do we decouple the complexity? We can do all that but we can do that, and we're hosted in the cloud, and we've helped you to accelerate cloud. And that's where we think AVS really fits for our customers. So in terms of what AVS actually is, AVS is a VMware software-defined data center that is sold, delivered, supported, updated, and the roadmap managed by Microsoft, validated by VMware. So as far as you as a consumer are concerned, you consume AVS just like any other Azure native service. And what I mean by that is it deploys using the Azure portal or the Azure command line interface, even an ARM template, and it is consumed using Azure billing meters like any other Azure service. So the service is billed hourly, and you can also take flexible RIs on 1 and 3 year reserved instances. We typically recommend a customer takes an RI because a 3 year RI, for example, gives you around about a 53% discount over taking the service as pay as go. But this is a first party service, single tenanted to you, that is fully integrated into the Azure fabric with access on a backbone network connection to Azure services that allows you to move at speed, allows you to extend your on-premise world, and allows you to integrate with Azure services easily. And because AVS is treated like any other native Azure service, we also get the benefits of other Azure native services. So things like Azure hybrid use benefit, which allows you, as long as you've got active software assurance on premise, it allows you to move existing Windows licenses and SQL Server licenses. It allows you to move those workloads in some instances without having to acquire any further licenses. And we also qualify for 3 extended security updates for SQL Server and Windows Server 2008 as well. So if you need to buy time, if you don't want to pay for the custom support agreements, you can use native Azure, you can use AVS, and that buys you time to modernize. And as I mentioned, we fully integrate with those Azure native services, so we would allow you to modernize your applications without necessarily doing a full refactor and re-architect. We also see our customers taking advantage of the many use cases that are available with AVS. Our 2 most popular ones right now are data center expansion. So those customers who have a hybrid model, who want to get the latest VMware technology, don't necessarily want to invest in CapEx, want to consume it as a service, data center expansion, AVS allows us to do that. We see customers that are trying to exit the data center and who need to get out of the data center at speed. We can help with that as well. And we have customers that have been able to move significant workloads overnight, over a short period of time, in support of that DC exit activity. We also see customers now looking at disaster recovery. So now we have customers that have moved workloads from on-premise into AVS. They want the ability to move high priority workloads. And to do that, you've got to have high availability, and you've got to have a DR solution. So we have solutions now that allow customers to fail over from on-premise to AVS and back and forth, and also from AVS to AVS. So customers that have exited the data center, we can actually fail over with tools such as VMware's own Site Recovery Manager. We can move from one region to another Azure region. We also see customers emerging in the desktop virtualization space. So customers that have invested in Horizon on-premise, want to extend that footprint, we can help them with that. And customers that are on their modern apps journey, we can extend the VMware platform into AVS to support the developer on their Kubernetes deployment, on their next-gen app journey, and providing that single API across all environments. So that's why I think customers like AVS, and that's why it adds to their cloud journey, because we can help them get there quicker. But what does it look like? What is it that we actually deploy? What is the architecture? I'm going to spend the rest of the presentation today just looking at what that architecture looks like. So the first thing to say is we're not in all Azure regions. I think there's well over 70 Azure regions, although I just need to check my numbers, but I'm pretty sure it's over 70 now. AVS, we're in 17 of those regions today. From a European perspective, all the major Azure DCs are covered: North and West Europe, UK West and UK South, and we also have presence in both the Americas and Asia Pacific. Now, in terms of what it is we actually deploy, then we deploy into Azure like any other Azure service. So we deploy into a subscription that sits in a resource group. And when we deploy AVS, we deploy a minimum of 3 nodes. And those 3 nodes are hyper-converged. So we get software-defined storage with vSAN, we get our ESX clusters, and we also get software-defined networking with NSX. Now, the thing to call out here is there's no requirement to have those offerings on-premise. As long as you've got vSphere 6 or later on-prem, we can connect to that. We can move those workloads without any problems. I also mentioned that we connect to those Azure native services. So when you deploy AVS, we also get a connection via what's called a dedicated Microsoft Edge router. And that allows us to have up to a 10 gigabit connection to Azure resources that are in that region. And we can connect to the VNet construct. So any PaaS service that supports private endpoint or service endpoints, we can connect to. So if you want to modernize SQL, we can do that via this connection. You want to modernize your legacy IIS with an app service plan or an app service environment, we can do that. You need data gravity to get your applications closer to your data lake storage, we can do that as well. So any scenario where you need that data gravity or you want to modernize, AVS can fit that deployment pattern. Now, in terms of getting started, there are a number of prerequisites. Nothing too major. So the first thing we need is you need to be an EA or a CSP consuming customer. And like any other a large Azure virtual machine type, you have to request an allocation to your subscription in order to access those AVS resources. We deploy into a resource group, and at the point of deploying the service, we do need a subscription contributor access in order to deploy AVS. But once AVS is then deployed, we can then move back to our back roles to manage who has access to the environment and who can control the environment. From a networking point of view, there's a few things that we need. So we need a /21 overall, which sort of manifests itself into one /22 and 2/24 networks. That allows us to deploy for configuration maximums. On-premise, we need to open some firewall ports in order to connect our on-premise to AVS. And we need a transport mechanism to move the data. That has to be an express route circuit, an Azure site-to-site VPN, or a SD-WAN connection. And we'll talk a little bit more about the networking in the coming slides. In terms of the node type for AVS, there's one, it's an AV36, and each one has 576 gig of RAM, 36 cores with hyper-threading enabled, and around about 9 to 10 terabytes of usable storage per node. And as I said, the entry point is 3 nodes, and you scale in a HCI hyper-converged way. So when you add nodes, you add compute, you add process, you add storage. Now, in terms of storage, it's just based on vSAN. And as this is just a high-level overview today, we won't go into all the details of that. But the question I'm often asked is my data encrypted both in transit and at rest? And can I manage my own keys for that encryption? So the first thing to say is that your traffic is encrypted in transport and at rest. And at rest today, your keys are managed by Microsoft, although I'm expecting in the not too distant future an ability for you to manage your keys yourself. But rest assured, data both at rest and in transit is fully encrypted. And because of this connection to Azure native services, we have a number of ways in which we can extend storage. So we can extend storage today at a VM level, and we can do that via blob stores, Azure Files, File Sync, and NetApp Files. We also have two offerings in various states of preview. So we have something called disk pools, which is in public preview. And disk pools will allow you to expand your data store with iSCSI. So this gives us an independent way to scale storage as opposed to all the nodes. And in private preview, we have something called NetApp Files at a data store level, and that will allow you to extend your data store with NFS storage. So while I think both of those are still some way off GA, you can see the direction that we'll be going here, and that is to provide as much flexibility as we can, both from extending storage at the data store and extending storage at the VM level. So if we move on to networking, the networking for AVS is based on NSXT, and I typically get two reactions to that. The first one is, fantastic, I get full access to the NSXT manager, I'm in complete control of how I configure and I set things up. And the second reaction is, I've not really used NSX and I'm a little bit nervous about using it, and networking is not really my thing. But don't worry if you're the latter. All the basic capability that you need to get started with NSXT is exposed directly in the Azure portal. So if you need to access NSXT but a little bit nervous, go into the Azure portal. In there you can create network segments, you can create DHCP servers, DNS servers, all that basic functionality absolutely surfaced in the portal. But of course you can also access the NSXT manager as well. So I think what we should do here is just break down the connectivity just to give you a feel of what's going on. So if we forget about AVS for a moment and look at how a customer connects to Azure native services, then the way in which they do that is they have a sort of edge router at their data center boundary, and they connect to a MSEE, an edge router at the front end, which is typically done over a site-to-site VPN or an express route circuit. And that edge router is then terminated from a peering location onto the Azure VNet construct via a virtual network gateway. You configure your virtual network gateway for express route, and now we have connectivity between on-premise and native Azure. So AVS comes along, we deploy AVS, and we talked about that dedicated edge router. You don't manage this, you don't have to worry about updating or controlling this. That's all done by Microsoft as part of the service. But what we do is we can advertise and connect to express route gateways that are connected to VNets, so we can connect to Azure native services. We can also use something called Express Route Global Reach, which allows us to make these two edge routers routable, so we can move traffic across there. And we can also send all traffic from AVS to on-premise. We can send traffic from AVS to a hub spoke subscription potentially, if that's what you've deployed, where we can send traffic for inspection on an MVA or an Azure firewall. Now, one thing I should stress here is that I mentioned the networking requirements. The IP address space that we apply here, that should be non-overlapping. And the reason that we want it to be non-overlapping, and it's a private address space, is so we have full flexibility to move workloads from on-premise, to talk to native Azure, to go from on-premise to native Azure. That keeps everything open to us in terms of moving resources around. Now, I mentioned site-to-site VPN and SD-WAN. And now this slide says non-production, which is true. So we do support this architecture, network architecture in non-prod today. And the way in which we enable that is we've got to terminate these routers. And the best way to terminate these routers is to use an Azure service called V1 Hub, which allows us to create these gateways, and that will then manage all our transitive routing for us. The good news here is I expect to see in the not too distant future this methodology being supported for production for the Azure site-to-site VPN, as well as an SD-WAN connection. So watch this space. Anytime now we should see that go live, and then that opens AVS, I think, to much more customers because we aren't dependent upon an express route circuit being in place. Now, in terms of how we move workloads from on-premise into Azure, into AVS, and then also Azure, is we use something called HCIX, Hybrid Cloud Exchange. And when we deploy AVS, we actually get access to the HCIX Cloud Manager. So that is installed at the point of provisioning AVS as a service. And what we do is once the HCIX Cloud Manager is available, we log into the HCIX Cloud Manager and we say, hey, we're ready to set this up on premise now. And that will give you an OVA. That OVA you then install into your on-prem vCenter, and that is what we call the HCIX connector. And that OVA then installs a number of appliances that allows us to have full hybrid connectivity. So it creates what we call a service mesh via this HCIX interconnect, and it also establishes a site pairing between on-premise and AVS. It also manages all that optimization across the network in terms of WAN optimization, dedupe, compression, as well as ensuring that that connection is fully encrypted. Now, it's this tool as well that allows us to do what's called a layer 2 stretch network. So I mentioned earlier on that some customers can use AVS to extend their network from on-premise into the cloud without a change of IP address. The ability to do that completely live, that's what we do with HCIX. So we have two options. We can do a stretch layer 2, or we can do what's called a layer 3 new network segment. But for some customers that need to get out quick, they want to just vMotion live, we can absolutely do that with the HCIX tool. And as I've mentioned, there's lots of features available in HCIX, from allowing us to retain address schemes if we do stretch layer 2, it reduces the latency, it gives us the ability to do various WAN optimizations. And as I talked about right at the beginning, our multi-cloud story, it allows you to move workloads between clouds as well. And we also have the ability to add an add-on SKU, which takes us to HCIX Enterprise, and that brings two key features: mobility groups, as well as mobility optimized networking. And let's look at that in a bit more detail now. So I said that you could take a VM from on-premise and you could live vMotion that into the cloud. And that absolutely you can do with HCIX Advanced, but it's done in a serial manner. The other thing you can do with HCIX Advanced is do what's called a bulk migration. So you say, right, I've got 20 VMs I need to move. I'll start the replication off on a Monday. That replication will take till Sunday. And on the Sunday during the change window, I switch off the VMs on premise. It flushes everything down and it brings those VMs up on AVS. Now that actually creates a new layer 3 network segment. So it does require an IP change, but we fully automate that IP change through HCIX as part of the migration. And we see lots of large customers doing that particular migration method because it fits nicely with assigned change windows. Now, with HCIX Enterprise, we can combine those two worlds together. So we can live vMotion in parallel, so we can do more than one. And at the point of QS in the virtual machines, you know, in advance where we turn them off, at that point we vMotion, we don't turn off. So you can actually get mass scale without downtime using HCIX. And we also have mobility optimized networking using HCIX. And this ensures that if we do a stretch layer 2 network, we avoid suboptimal routing, known as the trombone effect, because all our routing information is still on-prem. We're just stretching that network. With mobility optimized networking over HCX, that allows us to have optimal routing, and it saves having to bring everything back on premise just to talk to a virtual machine that's sat next to it. So really neat technology, lots of choice that allows you freedom to move workloads in AVS, out of AVS, data center exit, data center extension. We manage that all through HCX. One of the things I really like about AVS is this concept of choice. So from a management point of view, you get access to the NSXT manager, vCenter, and that's fab. So if you're coming at it from a VMware technology point of view, all the things that you know and love will all work. We also bring the whole VMware ecosystem to the solution now as well. So Site Recovery Manager, Horizon Desktop, Tanzu Standard Edition, vRealize Automation, vRealize Operations, Log Insight, all those tools that you use on-prem, you can also use with AVS as well. But if you're coming at it from a cloud solution architect, perspective, and you're not so familiar with the VMware tools, we can help you as well. So a lot of the things you can do in the Azure portal, so baseline monitoring, setting up alerts, managing your connectivity, or scaling the environments, all can be done via the Azure portal. And then if you need to get insight into the VMs that are running on vCenter, then Microsoft surface all that data to Azure Arc, and you can then manage the VMs through Azure Arc. So complete choice, you can use one ecosystem or the other, or you can take the best bits from each one and use them to the needs of your requirements and enterprise. Now, from a support point of view, because it's a Microsoft first-party service, support comes directly from Microsoft. So if you have an issue with vCenter, with NSX, HCX, you just raise a support ticket in exactly the same way as you would with any other Azure service. So that could be via your TAM, it could be in the Azure portal, it could be a phone call, and Microsoft will manage that ticket end to end until resolved. Now, it may mean Microsoft support need VMware support to help resolve the issue, but that is hidden from you as the consumer. You just interface directly with Microsoft. Now, I mentioned that the VMware ecosystem also comes now to AVS. That ecosystem is supported by VMware. Now, the good news here is that you can still raise a ticket to Microsoft through your TAM or the Azure portal, but as long as you flag it correctly, such as it's a vRealize service or it's Tanzu standard, they will just offload the ticket directly to VMware, and VMware support will then take that on. So simplified support, single point of contact, and just that slight variation if it's for a VMware ecosystem product. Now, before I end, I always think it's important to talk about shared responsibility for cloud. So I want you to think of AVS as a managed IaaS service. And what I mean by that is Microsoft manage all the deployments, they manage the life cycle. So if software updates come out or security patches come out, Microsoft will do that. And the way in which they do that is invisible to you. It's all given to you as part of the service. And Microsoft will give you the baseline configuration of the solution as well. Where you as the customer or consumer take over is anything above the guest OS. So how you back it up, how you encrypt the VM, HADR, that's all your responsibility. As well as the configuration of your single sign-on provider. I mentioned earlier, have access to NSX. So you're responsible for configuring NSX as well as vSAN. So you get the core service, it's evergreened, you worry about your configuration and what you host on top. Now, I hope you found today's session useful, and I hope I've done two things. One, I hope I've articulated where AVS fits in our multi-cloud strategy. And secondly, I hope I've given you a taster of how AVS can help our customers, what the use cases are, where it fits in a cloud strategy, and giving you some insight into the AVS solution architecture. So I want to thank you for your time today. It's greatly appreciated. And I just wanted to share some resources before I left you. So we have some fantastic documentation, both on the VMware cloud website, as well as on docs.microsoft.com. Well, if you're interested in AVS, I highly recommend completing the Microsoft Learn module on AVS. We now have 6 modules for AVS on the Learn platform, and it's a great way to find out more about it and understand it in more detail. If you're interested in deploying AVS, we also have a number of hands-on labs that give you that step-by-step guide of how to implement AVS. And of course, on our documentation, we have all our best practices guides, architectural best practice, network design documentation that allows you to get the most from the service. And of course, finally, my team are here to help. Microsoft are here to help. The Bytes team are here to help. So if you do have questions, you do need follow-ups, then please use the Bytes team to make sure that you get access to me and the Microsoft team. And with that, I will thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this webinar. Thank you for your time.